Hi, who's ready for the next chapter? I am. We are still on book 4 of the Infinity Ring. We are reading chapter 17. This book is Curse of the Ancients by Matt Delapina. Chapter 17. The way events unfolded. It didn't take long for Sarah to see what the Mayan people were up against. As she, Dak, and Rick hurried away from the observatory, they passed the village square where several Franciscan monks were tossing ancient Mayan artifacts into a massive pile. It was dawn now, so Sarah could see it all clearly. A few monks were tucking kindling into the pile. 24 or so armed Spanish men stood in a circle around the monks, almost daring villager locals to interfere. Sarah noticed that all the guards from the prison were part of the circle. So were the men who'd forced the Mayans out of the cave. One monk seemed to be overseeing the entire operation. Sarah studied him as they moved past the scene. She knew he must be the infamous Diego de Landa. Babka wasn't at his hut. Whatever I call him. They found him in a nearby ball court, huddled with several other Mayan men, including his younger cousin, Kanish. Babka. I've been calling him Babka this whole time. That's not how you say his name, but Sarah said, half out of breath, "Have you seen what the monks are doing in the square?" "I know what they're doing, little sister." He turned around, showing the crossbow in his hands. "It is why we are preparing for battle." "But they're sitting there waiting for you," Sarah shouted. "And they're heavily armed," Rick added. "If they try to burn our history, we will stand up against them," Babka said. He grinned at Sarah. "I'm not afraid to risk my life for what's right." Then he turned back to his men and began barking instructions. She spun around to face Dak and Rick. "I have to help them," she said. "Sarah, we need you," Rick said. "The best way to help them," Dak said, "is to fix this break. We can change the way the world perceives the Mayan people forever." Sarah was so confused. She felt a strange, unexplainable loyalty towards these people, like they were family. And if they were willing to risk their lives, she felt like she should too. But the rational side of Sarah knew Dak was right. If they fixed the break, make sure the right codex survived the burning, the Mayan would no longer be famous for declaring. The Maya would no longer be famous for declaring the SQ sovereigns of the world. Maybe instead, they would be celebrated for their actual wisdom and scientific achievements. Sarah never thought she'd consider the Mayan scientific, but that's exactly what they were. She turned back to Babka. "We need your help getting into the room into the observatory." "Can it wait till after our battle in the square?" Kanish said, frowning at her. "You may have noticed Babka's a little preoccupied at the moment." "I'm sorry, but it can't wait," Sarah said flatly. "Babka, do you have the keys to the doors in the observatory basement?" "If it is a lock in the village," Babka said, "I have the key." "And what's in the basement?" Kanish said. "There's a room we think might be very important to us," Dak said. Babka stood there looking out over the horizon. "It would be much nicer if this could wait." "Or you could just give us the keys," Dak suggested. "We'll bring them back as soon as we're done." "Only a locksmith handles locksmith keys," Babka said. "I will take them," Kanish said, tossing the coil of rope he had been holding. He picked up his crossbow and said, "Babka, you stay here and continue your preparation. I will hurry back." "You'll really take us?" Dak said. "Obviously you are desperate," Kanish said, "so we will go." "You know where the keys are," Babka said. "Come back as soon as you can. We will need every man this morning." Kanish took off in a jog toward Babka's hut. Sarah, Dak, and Rick were right on his heels. Kanish was a very calm and composed man. That was what stood out most to Sarah as they walked past the village square on their way back to the observatory. Dak and Rick were a few steps behind, talking. Excuse me. So Sarah was free to watch Kanish as he studied the Spanish men guarding the pile of Mayan artifacts. He showed no emotion. "Doesn't it bother you?" Sarah asked him. "It bothers me very much," Kanish said, "but it is unjust and ignorant. They do not wish to tolerate what they do not understand." Sarah shook her head. "If I had that crossbow you're wearing, I'd be tempted to fire off a few arrows right now." Kanish only smiled at her. Once the square was well behind them, he said, Would you like to tell you a story of two boys?" It seemed like an odd time to tell a story, but Sarah thought Kanish was intrigued, so she told him, "I'd love to hear a story." "Wait," Dak said. "What story?" "We want to hear a story too." "Many years ago," Kanish began, "two young boys went out on a raft with one of the most respected elders of the village. This would be both boys' first fishing trip. One of them was the son of a king. The other was a neighborhood boy who the king's son was fond of. They went out in the deeps where the fish were known to bite. The neighborhood boy took to fishing right away. He caught 3 fish within the first hour. The king's son did not fare quite as well. He had trouble casting his line. The elder assured him it was simply bad luck. A little while later, the weather began to change." Kanish paused as he swung past the observatory door and held it out for Sarah, Dak, and Rick. "What happened next?" Dak asked as soon as they were inside. Sarah had no idea how the story applied to anything that she'd said, but she was curious too. "The elder told the boys they must head for shore right away," Kanish continued. "But the king's son had other ideas. He demanded that they remain in the ocean until he caught a fish too. He threatened to tell his father if the elder failed to respect his wishes. You would lose your standing in the village," he said, the elder pointing to the swirling sky, and told the king's son that they were in danger, and he began paddling toward the shore. They were at the stairs now, and Kanish descended them slowly. On their way in, he said, the sea grew very rough. A powerful wave rose up and slammed into the wooden raft. The neighborhood boys' fish all washed back into the ocean. Then a second wave appeared, this one bigger than stronger. It picked up the small raft and slammed it back down against the sea. The raft collapsed underneath them, leaving the 2 boys and the elder alone in the rough water, with nothing to keep them afloat. It was a desperate situation for the elder. Neither boy could swim, and he knew he would only have the strength to save one boy. He turned to them, both thrashing around, fighting to keep their heads above water. It was an impossible dilemma. He cared for both boys. But when another large swell rose up in the sea behind them, the elder chose. He grabbed the shirt of the neighborhood boy and held tight as the waves crossed over the top of them, forcing them both underwater. He fought against the current and made it to the surface, holding the boy's face out of water. Then he swam with this one free hand to the shore, and eventually they made it. Sarah stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "What happened to the king's son? Did he die?" "You can't just leave us hanging," Dak said. Sarah noticed that Rick seemed far less interested. She tapped the back of his elbow and mouthed, "You okay?" He nodded. "The king's son washed ashore several minutes later," Kanish said. "He had drowned. The elder told the truth that night, and when the king came to see him, he said he understood in the sea that he would only be able to save one boy, and he had chosen the neighborhood boy. The king ordered the elder be put to death the following morning, just before the elder was to be sacrificed. The neighborhood boy snuck over to the holding cell, sobbing, and begged the elder to tell him why he hadn't chosen the king's son. And do you know what the elder said?" "What?" Dak said. "Tell us." Kanish glanced at Sarah and smiled. "He told the boy that he knew the choice he had made in the sea would be negative in the short term. He would pay with his life, but in the long term, he believed it would prove to be most beneficial." "How is that possible?" the boy cried. "Because tomorrow," the elder explained, "you are going to see a group of people who are very important to me, and you're going to listen to what they have to say. And if my instincts are correct, you will carry their important message into future generations. Maria came hurrying out of the room at the end of the hall holding a candle. "You found the key?" she asked. Kanish held up the massive key ring for her to see. Then he began sifting through them, looking for the right one. Sarah watched nervously as the first 2 keys he tried failed to work. "So, I must have missed something," Dax said to Sarah. "Why was he telling us that story?" "He's right here," Sarah said. "Why don't you ask him?" "How about it, Kanish?" Dax said. Kanish was too preoccupied to answer. The 3rd and the 4th keys failed as well, but the 5th one slid right into the lock and turned easily. Kanish shoved open the heavy stone door and said, "After you, my friends." Sarah was the first one inside. She expected to see all kinds of Mayan artifacts, but the room was completely empty. She walked to the far wall, studying the floor along the way. It looked like there were some fresh drag marks. "I don't understand," Maria said. "According to all the records, this is the room." "Looks like you had some bad intel," Dax said. Rick tapped Sarah on the arm and motioned back to Kanish, who was still hovering by the door. "Are we sure we can trust—" "I'll tell you the point of the story," Kanish interrupted, gripping the top of the door frame. Everyone turned back to look at him. Everyone turned back to look at him. I'm reading ahead. "Sometimes we must do things that are detrimental in the short term because we know they will prove advantageous in the long term. There is nothing left in this room because I cleared it all out. The artifacts you thought you found are at the bottom of the pile in the village square." Maria fell to her knees. "What are you saying, Kanish?" she cried. The realization hit Sarah like a ton of brick. "He's a time warden," she said. Dax started marching toward Kanish with his fists clenched, but Kanish only smiled as he pulled an arrow from the pouch on his shoulder. He loaded it in his crossbow and raised it at Dax, who stopped in his tracks. "I am a proud Mayan," Kanish said, "and in the short term it will be painful to see the legacy of my people turn into ash. See, Diego de Landa will only allow one codex to survive for historical purposes. It shall be the only legacy of the Mayan people." He selected a codex from ancient Ismail, written by the legendary scribe named Pakal. But we have composed our own codex that reveals the SQ is the rightful survivor of the world. It is the perfect opportunity to spread our message far and wide. For the long term, that is what has to be done. "You're selling out your own people," Sarah shouted. "I am advancing an ideology," Kanish said. "Now please hand over what's in your satchel." "For the second I saw you two enter the holding cell, I suspected you might be from the future." "Is DeLanda a time warden too?" Dax asked. Kanish looked appalled. "That man could never be part of our movement. He's too blinded by religious zealotry. But he'll make a fine tool." He turned back to Sarah. "Now hand over your time travel device." "I'll never give it to you," Sarah said through her gritted teeth. Kanish pointed the arrow right to her forehead. "You have 3 seconds," he said, pulling back at the cocking stirrup. Rick ripped open Sarah's satchel, pulled out the ring, and set it on the ground in front of her. "No!" Sarah screamed as Kanish reached down to pick it up. He backed through the doorway, lowered his crossbow. "In case you are wondering," he said, "the neighborhood boy in the story was me. Sometimes destiny finds the man instead of the man finding his destiny. If the elder who saved my life had been a historian instead of a time warden, who knows? I may have been on your side. But that's not how the events unfolded." Kanish slammed closed the stone door, and Sarah heard the lock click. I was about to say, we have read almost in this entire book, and we have not encountered a time warden. And here we are, 3 more chapters, and they are locked in a room. Follow the Snakes is the next chapter. I hope you have a wonderful day.